They took the name off the gate on a Tuesday. I stood across the road with a paper cup of gas station coffee and watched two men on a scissor lift unbolt the letters one at a time. D-E-V-E-R-E-L-L. 40 years of rust had printed the name into the steel behind it, a pale ghost of itself, and I remember thinking the ghost would outlast the family. Ghosts usually do. It took 11 weeks to bring that sign down. It should have taken 30 years. The day shift walked in under the lift while the men worked. Nobody lost a job. Nobody missed a paycheck. The presses were running before the second E came off, and I could feel them through the soles of my boots. That low, steady thump I grew up thinking was the town's heartbeat. Maybe it was. It just turned out the heart belonged to the people working the machines and not to the name bolted over their heads. My father's truck sat in the space nearest the door, the one with the faded blue lines. He was not working. He was there because the men were doing the sign that morning, and they had asked him to come, and he would never say why that mattered to him, and every man walking through that gate knew why without being told. He sat behind the wheel with his left hand resting in its brace on top of the wheel, and when the last letter came down, he gave the lift crew one small nod, the same nod he gave me when I mowed the lawn right the first time, and that nod was the loudest thing I ever saw my father do. 11 weeks earlier, my phone rang at 2 in the morning, and a nurse 300 miles north of me said the words, "Hand in surgery, and you should come now." I want to tell you this story the way it happened, so you should know two things going in. The first is that my father worked that press line for 31 years and raised me alone on it, and the town we come from read his quiet as smallness the whole time. The second is that when the company slid a 30-year-old piece of paper across a desk and told me his hand was covered by a waiver, the quiet son they remembered sat down in that office. And the soldier they had never met stood up. They never learned my call sign. They never saw a uniform. By the end, they knew exactly what I commanded, and the knowing was worse. Hit like, subscribe for more betrayal stories, and comment your city or country. To understand what they did, you have to understand who they thought they were doing it to. Markland Falls, Ohio, is a town of about 4,000 people arranged around one factory the way iron filings arrange themselves around a magnet. Deverell Stamping and Tool. 400 jobs, give or take, in a county that does not have 400 other jobs to offer. The plant stamped brackets and housings and door panels for appliance companies, and it had done it since before I was born, and the family that owned it had been the weather in that town for as long as anyone could remember. You did not love the weather or hate the weather. You dressed for it. My father hired on at the plant in 1995, when I was 14. Before that, he had done a little of everything, and after my mother died in 1993, he needed steady, and the press line was steady. 31 years. He never missed a shift. I do not mean he rarely missed a shift. I mean the plant kept attendance records, and men used to check them just to see if it was still true. He raised me alone on that line. He packed my lunch every school morning with hands that smelled like cutting oil, no matter how hard he scrubbed them, and he signed my report cards at a kitchen table under a light he fixed himself. And he never once told me life was fair, and he never once acted like that was an excuse to be less than square with people. My mother's picture stayed on the shelf by the radio. The mortgage got paid off in 2019, and he told me about it 3 months after the fact, like it was a thing that had happened to someone else. The town liked him the way you like a fence post, useful, quiet, always where you left it. Amos Halloran, good man, nothing to say. They read his quiet as small, and because they read him that way, they read me that way. I left for the Army at 18 in 1999, and the town filed that under boys who leave. When I came back to visit, I came in an old pickup in plain jackets, with a haircut that could have belonged to anybody. Somebody at the diner once asked my father what I did, and he said, government work, logistics, something like that, and went back to his eggs. That was not modesty. That was policy. My father never wanted his boys' war served up as conversation between the counter and the register, and I had my own reasons for agreeing. And so for 25 years, the town of Markland Falls believed the Halloran boy moved pallets for the army. I should tell you what his days looked like, because the days are the man. Up at 4:45 without an alarm, because 31 years will build a clock into your bones. Coffee, 1 cup, black, in the mug I made him at church camp in 1992 that says, "World's okayest fisherman," which he is not. He is a terrible fisherman, and he has protected that mug through 3 decades and 1 kitchen repaint like it was made of church glass. Lunch packed the night before. At the plant by 5:40 for a 6 o'clock shift, because his father told him once that on time is late. First man on the line. He knew press number 6 the way a farrier knows a particular horse, its sounds, its moods, the little hitch in the feed that meant trouble coming 2 days out. He had written up that hitch, by the way, twice, on paper. You will want to remember that. And the town moved around the plant the way tide moves around a rock. The school calendar bent to shut down weeks. The church fund drive knew to ask in the weeks after the halberd order shipped. 3 generations of men had proposed marriage on the strength of a Deverell paycheck, and the family up the hill collected that gratitude the way other men collect stamps. When people in Markland Falls said the company, they said it the way you say the river. Nobody asked whether the river is fair. I sat with him in the hospital the first morning, 11 weeks before they took the sign down. He was propped up in the bed with his left arm in a fixator, pins and rods holding what the press had left him, and the first thing he said to me was not about the hand. He said, "You drove all night. You eat anything?" I said I had. He said, "Liar," and told me where the cafeteria was. That was my father at 68 years old, with a handful of hardware, worrying about my breakfast. When I asked him what happened, he got vague in a way that had nothing to do with the painkillers. A misfeed. He was clearing it. The press cycled when it should not have. Those things happen, son. Then he looked out the window and said the sentence that told me everything about the next 11 weeks. He said, "It's a hand. Men here have given worse for less. Don't make noise. I need the pension." I want you to hold on to that sentence. A man gives a company 31 years and a working hand, and his first instinct from the hospital bed is to apologize for the inconvenience and beg his own son not to make noise. That is not weakness. That is what a company town does to good men over 3 decades. It teaches them the ladder has one owner. It teaches them gratitude for the rungs. I told him to rest. I drove to the house I grew up in, and I sat in the kitchen under the light he fixed, and I looked at his lunch pail sitting washed and dry by the sink, packed habit deep, waiting for a shift that was never coming, and I made coffee and did not sleep. In the morning, I went to the plant to ask for the incident report. Simple thing, routine thing, the thing any son would do. That is when I found out there was no incident report. The foreman met me in the front office instead of the floor. Denny Falk. I had known him distantly growing up, the way you know everybody in a town that size. He was 55 now, and he had the look of a man doing arithmetic he hated. And in 30 seconds of standing in front of him, I understood the math. He had a kid at the community college and 22 years in, and a script he had been handed, and the script was all he had to offer me. He would not look at me. He looked at the wall over my shoulder and he said, "Your dad signed a waiver. Company's covered." I asked him what a waiver from 1998 had to do with a press cycling out of sequence in April of this year. He looked at the wall harder and said the safety of their people was the company's highest priority. And if I had questions, there was a process, and the process started with human resources. He said it like a man reading proof of life off a card someone else wrote. Then he leaned in a half-inch, and for 1 second, Denny Falk was in the room with me, and he said, "Lo, take your dad home when he's able. He's a good man." And then he was gone back behind his eyes, and that was the last honest thing anybody at Deverell Stamping and Tools said to me for weeks. Human Resources was a woman named Marcia Ostrander, 51, in an office with a candy dish and no window, and she had a folder ready. I have been in rooms where folders were ready. It is never good news for the person the folder is about. Inside the folder was my father's life reduced to exhibits, and on top, printed fresh that morning, was a photocopy of a 1998 document with his signature at the bottom. A voluntary release and pension memorandum from the year the Deverell family bought the plant. Half a page of small print and a signature line, and my father's careful, embarrassed handwriting. She walked me through it like a realtor showing a house. When the family acquired the plant in 1998, the workforce signed transitional agreements. My father's included a release. In consideration of continued employment and pension eligibility, the employee releases and holds harmless, and so on and so on. She used the word comprehensive twice. I asked her about the incident report. She said the event was still being documented internally. I asked her about the machine. She said the machine had passed all scheduled inspections, and there would be a record of that, and the record would say what it said. Then she took out a second folder, the one the whole meeting had been built to deliver, and she slid it across the desk, and her voice went warm, and that warmth was the coldest thing in the room. 6 weeks of severance. A voluntary separation, given his age. Continued clinic care at the company's occupational health partner, as a gesture, and a one-page acknowledgement for me to witness, confirming the injury fell under the 1998 release. She put a pen on top of it, angled toward me, and said, "Take the severance. Sign here and we part friends." I looked at the pen. I looked at the waiver with my father's signature on it, a signature he put down the year I turned 17, when the new owners lined up men who had mortgages and told them the pension came with a page of small print, sign or shake hands with the road. 31 years, one hand, 6 weeks of pay, and a candy dish. The thing about my line of work, my former line of work, is that it burns the theater out of you. I did not stand up fast. I did not raise my voice. There is a version of this story where I say something cinematic and the room goes cold, and you cheer. That is not what happened, because that is not what works. What happened is that I picked up the waiver, and I folded it in half the way you fold a map of ground you intend to walk, and I set it back down in front of her, and I told them one thing. I said, "My father is not signing anything, neither am I." Marcy Ostrander smiled the way people smile when the meeting has gone off the card, and she said she understood this was an emotional time, and that the offer had a shelf life, and that I should think about what was best for my father. On the way out, I stopped at the door and asked her one question, pleasantly, the way you ask about the weather. I asked whether press number 6 was running today. For half a second, the realtor face came off. Underneath it was the first fear I saw in that building. Then she said machine scheduling was not something human resources discussed, and wished me a good morning. It was a useful half second. It told me the press was the wound they were guarding, which meant the press was where the truth was. The next 2 weeks taught me the shape of the wall, and I want to lay it out for you plainly, because if you have never lived in a company town, you may think I am exaggerating, and if you have lived in one, you will be nodding before I finish. The clinic that treated my father's follow-ups was Ledbetter Occupational Health, run by Dr. Paul Ledbetter, 61, whose practice existed almost entirely on the company's referrals. I got a copy of his report. It described a hand with 4 fractures and hardware in it as a laceration and contusion event, treated with first aid and released. First aid. There is a reason a company clinic writes first aid on a report, and I would learn it soon enough. Injuries coded as first aid do not have to be recorded on the federal logs that safety regulators read. The report was not sloppy. It was written before the injury, in the sense that its conclusion had existed for years, waiting for a body to attach itself to. And once I knew to look for it, I saw the coding everywhere, in the town's own hands. The man at the feed store with 2 shortened fingers on his left hand. First aid, 19 years ago. The usher at church, whose wrist never sat right after what the clinic called a sprain event, first aid. A widow on Cedar Street whose husband's chest pains at the plant were documented as a personal health matter, unrelated to employment, 3 weeks before they killed him in the break room. None of these people were angry anymore. That was the part that sat in my stomach. The system had processed them so smoothly, so long ago, that they talked about their own bodies the way you talk about weather damage. It happens. It happened. Nobody's fault. A town full of men quietly missing pieces, all of them holding receipts marked first aid, and not one of them had ever seen another man's receipt. So not one of them knew he was standing in a pattern. Dr. Paul Ledbetter's brother was Judge Warren Ledbetter, 64, who sat on the only bench in the county and had for 19 years. The county's machine safety inspections were signed by an inspector named Chuck Vogel, 57, whose signature appeared on Deverell paperwork with a regularity that suggested either superhuman diligence or a very comfortable desk. I found out later which one it was. You can guess. The sheriff was Buck Amberson, 59, and he golfed with Lowell Deverell on Thursdays, and everybody knew it the way everybody knows the church schedule. And over it all sat the family. Lowell Deverell, 66, second generation, the man whose name was on the gate, and his son Bryce, 38, the plant manager, a man who had inherited the weather and mistaken it for something he personally was doing. I drove to the county seat and sat down with the one attorney in 3 counties who handled injury cases against employers, a decent man with a tired office, and he listened to the whole thing, and he did not laugh at me, which I respected. Then he laid it out. Any case I filed would land in front of Judge Warren Ledbetter. The medical record was already coded against us by the judge's own brother. The machine's inspection file was already signed clean by Vogel. The company would produce the 1998 waiver, and even though he could argue about what it did and did not cover, arguing takes years and appeals take longer. He said, every case like this dies in that courtroom, and the appeal outlives the client. I am not telling you it's right. I am telling you the water is uphill from here for 9 miles in every direction. I thanked him, and I meant it. He was the first person who had told me the truth on the record. That night I asked my father about 1998, about the day he signed it. He was quiet a while, and then he told me, and I'm going to pass it on to you exactly the way he said it, because I think about it still. The new owners set up folding tables in the cafeteria, he said. Lawyers down from Cleveland in good suits, a stack of packets, and a line of men in work boots. You got called up alphabetically. Halloran came early. The lawyer flipped to the tabs and put his finger where the signatures went, and behind my father the line stretched back past the vending machines. Men he had known since grade school, all of them doing the same arithmetic, a mortgage, a kid, a pension, one road out of town. Nobody explained the release paragraph. Nobody needed to. The explaining was the line itself. He said, I read it though. Standing right there, I read the whole thing. Lawyer didn't care for that. He looked at his brace. I knew what it was, son. I signed it anyway because you were 17 and the pension was real and the rest of it was maybe. A man takes maybe over nothing when he's got a boy to finish raising. 28 years later, they slid that same page across a desk at his son and called it coverage. On the drive back to Markland Falls, a sheriff's cruiser fell in behind my truck at the county line and stayed there for 8 miles. Not close, not far. Just present, the way a hand rests on a dog's collar. At the edge of town, it peeled off, and Sheriff Buck Amberson gave me 2 fingers off the wheel as he turned, friendly as a fence. That night I sat in my father's kitchen and wrote it all down on a legal pad. Every name, every connection, every place the wall was mortared to itself. Owner, manager, safety officer, HR, clinic, judge, inspector, sheriff. 9 names, 1 lattice. Any one of them alone was survivable. Together they were a town-sized machine for making injured men sign things. My father watched me from the doorway for a while, his fixator resting against the frame, and he said, You've been gone a long time, son. This town has 1 ladder, and they own every rung of it. He was right, so I stopped looking at the ladder and started reading the load-bearing math. I need to go back 27 years now, and I will keep it short, because the man this story is about wears a brace, not a beret. But you need to know what the Deverells did not know, or none of the rest of it will make sense. I enlisted in 1999 at 18, 2 months out of high school. Infantry first. I took to it, which surprised me more than anybody. Not the shooting, plenty of men shoot well. The order of it, the idea that chaos was just a system you had not mapped yet. In 2005, my battalion commander got tired of me correcting his operations sergeant's math and sent me to officer candidate school, and I came out a second lieutenant at 24, which in the Army makes you simultaneously an officer and a child. In 2009, after 2 deployments and a long argument with myself, I finished the Special Forces qualification course and earned the Green Beret. 5th Special Forces Group. I will not walk you through the schools. They were long and they were wet, and the men beside me were the finest people I have ever known. From 2010 to 2013, I commanded a Special Forces detachment, an ODA, 12 men whose job in plain terms was to go into broken places and make the breakage work for the good guys. Then a company. Then in 2021, they gave me a task force, which is the Army's way of saying several hundred people, aircraft, 3-letter partners, and problems that do not fit in a briefing slide. And the word they put in front of my name for all of it was commander. I retired in 2024, a lieutenant colonel at 43, 25 years after the recruiter in Markland Falls misspelled our street on my paperwork. I do quiet consulting now out of Clarksville, Tennessee. I own exactly one suit. Why did nobody in my hometown know any of this? 2 reasons. The first was my father. Amos Halloran would no more brag on his son than he would sing at the counter of the diner. Some of that was his nature. More of it was protection. He had watched that town chew on other families' news for 60 years, and he was not going to serve them as boys wore with their coffee. When people asked, he said logistics, and when they stopped asking, he was relieved. The second reason was mine. In the work I did, a quiet man's file is a loud man's problem. I spent 2.5 decades learning that the advertisement of capability is the cheapest form of it. The men I respected most were the ones you would seat next to the potato salad at a church picnic and never once suspect. I became one of them on purpose. The plain truck and the plain jacket were not a disguise I put on for Markland Falls. They were just what was left when the theater burned off. In my old bedroom at my father's house, there is a footlocker. Inside it, there is a beret and a folded flag from a funeral I do not talk about, and some paperwork. No trophies. I opened it exactly once in those 11 weeks, the second night, and I did not take anything out. I just needed to look at it while I thought, the way some men look at the ocean. Because here's the thing I knew, sitting in that kitchen with my legal pad, that the 9 names on the lattice did not know I knew. I had spent 25 years studying exactly one subject. Not weapons, not violence. Violence was the rare, regrettable last page of it. The subject was this: how power protects itself and where it lies to itself when it does. Corrupt police departments in 3 languages. Militias that own judges. Strongmen with private clinics that coded wounds as accidents. I had sat across plywood tables from warlords who ran their valleys precisely the way the Deverells ran that county: patronage downstairs, family upstairs, fear on the road, paper over everything. And my job, my literal profession, the thing the United States government paid me to command other men to do, was to look at a structure like that, find the one brick it could not afford to lose, and arrange for the structure to discover the brick was gone. You do not fight a wall. Fighting a wall is how you break your hands. An old contractor colleague called me that week because word travels in my community faster than in any small town, and he offered me loud options, the kind that come with invoices and deniability, and I listened to be polite, and then I told him no and hung up. Not because I was above it, because it was bad craft. Loud is what you do when you have no seam, and I had spent one evening with a legal pad, and I could already see the seam from my father's kitchen. I started the pad the way I used to start a target folder. Name at the top, assets, liabilities, dependencies. And under dependencies, I wrote one word and underlined it: the press. Here is what the town could not see, and honestly, here is what I did not fully see until the 3rd week. I did not need a single Deverell employee to testify. I did not need the town to be brave for me. The bravest witness in Markland Falls was going to be a 400-ton mechanical stamping press, because machines keep records and machines do not golf with the sheriff. But before the machine, there was a kid. His name was Dustin Paiva, 26 years old, a press operator with 4 years in, and he found me. I did not find him. He left a note under my truck's wiper blade where the parking ticket had been a week before, which I thought showed a sense of humor, and the note named a truck stop 2 counties east and a time. He sat across from me in the corner booth with his hood up, and his hands shook until the coffee came, and I want to be careful with this boy's dignity. because what he did took more courage than most of what I saw men decorated for. He had a car loan and a girlfriend and a mother on the east side of town, and he was terrified, and he came anyway. He put his phone on the table and turned it around. On the screen was a video, 40 seconds long, shot in January of this year from behind a column on the plant floor. It showed press number 6, my father's press, with a yellow tag zip-tied to its main disconnect. The tag said, "Do not operate," and it showed 2 men studying that tag. One was Gil Prentice, 48, the plant safety officer. The other was Bryce Deverill. The audio was mostly machine roar, but you did not need audio. Prentice cut the zip tie, and Bryce clapped him on the shoulder, and the tag went into a coat pocket, and the video ended. "That tag went on in January," Dustin said. "Insurance guy put it on. Not Vogel, not County. The insurance company's own engineer. Brake monitor kept faulting. The light curtain got bypassed back before I even hired in. Everybody knows you clear misfeeds by hand and pray. The insurance guy tagged it in January, and they ran it that same weekend. He came back in March and tagged it again. They ran it again. Weekend shifts, off the books, no badge scans, cash premium. Halberd order was behind." He looked at the table. "Your dad got hurt in April, clearing a misfeed, on 6. I asked him why he filmed it. He said, because my old man worked a press in Lorraine, and I know what a brake monitor fault means. Then he said, and because Amos taught me the line when I hired in, he is the reason I still have all my fingers." And his voice went, and we both looked out the window for a minute in respect of it. I told him 3 things. First, that he would never have to be the case, only a door into it, and that the difference mattered, and I would guard it. Second, that he should keep the video exactly where it was and touch nothing. Third, that his shift assignments were about to get worse, and that when they did, he should smile, comply, and document. He looked at me strangely on the third one. 10 days later, he understood it. That night, I called Tino Barrera. Master Sergeant Barrera, retired, was my team sergeant for 3 years on the detachment, which is a relationship civilians do not have a word for, closer than most brothers. He had spent his second career as a forensic engineer, machine safety, the man expert witnesses call when they are stuck. I got him at his kitchen table in El Paso, and I laid the whole thing out, the press, the tags, the coding, the county, all of it, and he was quiet until the end, which is how I knew he was smiling. "Colonel," he said, "you know what a brake monitor is?" I said I had recently become a student of them. "It's a data logger," he said. "That press was built with a control system that records every fault, every bypass, every cycle count, time-stamped in non-volatile memory. It does not care who the sheriff is. Somebody bypassed a light curtain, the controller knows. Somebody ran it under an active fault, the controller knows. You do not need a witness, Colonel. The press has been keeping notes on them for 2 years. Then he explained the part that mattered even more. The insurer's loss control engineer who hung those tags worked for the carrier, not the company. His reports lived in the carrier's files, in another state, beyond the reach of every Ledbetter and Vogel in Ohio. The company's own paperwork could lie all it wanted. There were 3 sets of records the Deverills could not touch: the machine's memory, the insurer's files, and the badge system's gate logs, which were hosted by a payroll vendor and would show exactly which weekends the plant hummed while officially dark. "Here's your problem," Tino said. "Chain of custody. You so much as photographed that controller yourself. You have handed their lawyer a gift. This has to be seized, not found. Federal, not county. You need OSHA in the door, unannounced, with the right words on the right form, and for the criminal side, the falsified logs, the coding, you need the Department of Labor's Inspector General riding along. And Grant," he said, using my first name, which he did about once a year, "you build the packet so clean that no one can ever say the angry son cooked it." So that is what I did, and I will tell you exactly how, because the how is the whole point of this story. I never set foot on that plant floor. I never took a photograph. I never touched a document I was not handed lawfully or could not obtain publicly. I built a target folder the way I had built 100 of them, except every single page of this one was legal, and the ordinance was paperwork. My father's original emergency room intake from the night of the injury, requested lawfully as his medical proxy, describing 4 fractures and surgical hardware, sat next to Dr. Paul Ledbetter's first aid coding, and the 2 documents could not both be true, and one of them was signed by a man whose practice was 90% company referrals. The 1998 waiver itself went in the folder, because Tino's employment lawyer contact took one look at it and laughed. You cannot waive workers' compensation in the state of Ohio. You could not in 1998 either. The document was not a shield. It was evidence, 3 decades of it, that the company's practice was to frighten injured men with paper. Every man who had ever signed under it was a pattern, and patterns are what federal investigators eat. Finding the pattern's people took the kind of patience that does not photograph well. I spent evenings at the VFW hall and the feed store and 2 funerals, listening more than talking, and one by one the coded men found their way to the subject the way water finds a low spot. The feed store man with the shortened fingers still had his packet from 1998 in a strongbox, unsigned by any witness, which his new lawyer would later describe as a gift. The widow on Cedar Street had kept her husband's plant medical file in a shoebox for 11 years because throwing it away felt like agreeing with it. None of them wanted revenge. Every one of them wanted the same thing my father wanted, which was for the record to finally say what had actually happened. I wrote no names down that were not volunteered. I promised nothing except that if the door ever opened, they would be told. It was the same work I had done in a dozen valleys on the other side of the world, and I will say now what I knew then and did not say. It was easier over there. Over there, the people the wall had hurt did not apologize to the wall while they talked to me. Dustin's video existed, time-stamped, geolocated, untouched on his phone, with Dustin's affidavit about the January and March tags and the ghost weekend shifts. The public record gave me Vogel's inspection filings, which I obtained through ordinary records requests, spread across 3 different county offices so no single clerk would see the shape of what was being assembled. His signatures cleared Press 6 in February, between 2 red tags. A county inspector passing a machine that the insurer's own engineer had condemned twice without ever noting the tags is a man with a very specific problem. And the seam, the brick the wall could not afford to lose, was the Halberd appliance contract. Halberd was the customer whose order book had the Deverells running a condemned press on ghost shifts. Halberd was a publicly traded company with a supplier code of conduct thicker than a phone book and a compliance office with actual teeth. The Deverells thought Halberd was the reason they had to run Press 6. I looked at the same contract and saw the mechanism by which the money would leave the building the moment the truth walked in. I mailed nothing from Markland Falls. The envelopes went out from 3 towns away, and the calls were made from parking lots, not because anyone was tapping my phone, but because craft is a habit and habits are what you have left when you are tired and angry and it is 2 a.m. and your father is asleep down the hall with a machine's signature holding his hand together. 6 weeks in, the folder was clean, cross-indexed, and duplicated in 3 places. Tino flew up on his own dime and spent a weekend red-teaming it, trying to break it the way a defense lawyer would, and on Sunday night, he closed the last binder and looked at me and said, "This is better than half of what we took upstairs overseas." Then he said, "You know it gets worse before it works." I knew. They could not see the folder, but they could feel something, the way animals feel pressure change, and the town tightened the way a company town tightens, politely, deniably, everywhere at once. It started with the pension. My father got a letter, cream paper, watermark, informing him that his pension disbursement review was pending resolution of open matters regarding his separation and inviting his cooperation. 11 words of small print to say, "The boy stops," or "the check's due." He read it at the kitchen table with his good hand flat on the wood, and for the first time in the whole affair, my father looked frightened. Not of the hand, never of the hand, of the pension, of being 70 with a ruined grip and nothing coming on the first of the month. That letter was a mistake, though they could not have known it. Up to that morning, some part of me had been running this operation with the throttle at civilian settings. Watching my father's face while he read cream paper with a watermark moved something in me to a different detent. Dustin got it next. Moved to nights without cause, then written up twice in 9 days. Lateness he could disprove, and a scrap rate that belonged to another operator. He did what I had asked. He smiled, complied, and documented. Every write-up went into a folder of his own, dated, photographed, annotated. They were building a file to discredit a witness they did not know existed yet. What they were actually building was Exhibit R, retaliation, and it would cost them more than the press. Then it came for me, soft as fog. The parking ticket on a legally parked truck outside the diner, Sheriff Amberson visible in his cruiser across the street, hand raised in a wave. The plates run so many times that a friend of a friend at the state level called to ask, delicately, why a county sheriff kept running a decorated retiree through the system. At the hardware store, the owner apologized to my back because he had been asked, by someone he could not refuse, to remember whether I had said anything threatening in his store. He looked sick saying it. I bought my sandpaper and told him to answer every question anyone asked him with the plain truth, and his relief nearly buckled his knees. They squeezed my father sideways too, in the way of small towns, through the soft tissue. His bowling league found its Thursday lane double-booked 2 weeks running. The men still came by the house, but they came after dark now, parking a street over. Good men made furtive by a family with a golf schedule, and my father noticed, because my father notices everything, and he never said one word about it, which was worse than if he had. The tired attorney called me again in the 5th week, not to warn me off this time. He had received, he said carefully, an inquiry from a Columbus firm about his caseload and his malpractice carrier, a thing that had never once happened in 30 years of practice, and he wanted me to know that whatever I was doing, somebody with money believed it was working. Then he said, "Don't tell me what it is," and hung up, and I sat in the truck a while, because that is what courage looks like at the county seat level, a man asking not to know so that he cannot be made to stop you. And Bryce Deverell talked. That was his function in the organism, I understood eventually. Lowell was the head and Bryce was the mouth. He held court at the country club bar and the Rotary lunch, and the word came back down the hill in the way that words do. The Halloran kid, some kind of clipboard soldier, supply corps, pushing pencils 20 years, and now he is playing investigator because the old man got careless and wants a payday. They laughed, I am told. There is a specific kind of confidence that comes from 3 generations of never being told no. From the inside, I would imagine it feels like being right about everything. From the outside, it looks like a man sawing, with great energy, at the branch he is sitting on. Everyone reasonable told me to stop. I want to be fair to them, because they were not wrong by the arithmetic they had. The attorney called to say the water was still uphill. Denny Falk found my father's cousin at church and passed a message. The old man's pension can still be saved, but the door is closing. Even Hollis Greer, the VFW post commander, 70 years old, a man I would shortly owe a debt to, pulled me aside by the flag stand and said kindly, "Son, I have watched this family bury better fights than yours." And my father. My father asked me to stop. It was a Tuesday night, 5 weeks in. He stood in the kitchen doorway with the brace on and his reading glasses pushed up into his hair, and he said, "Grant, enough. I'll sign their papers. It's 6 weeks of money and they leave us be. You've got your life down south. I'll not have you burn a year of it on this town." And then quieter, the real sentence underneath. "I'll not have them take anything else from this family on account of my hand." I stood at the counter, and I chose my words with more care than I have chosen most things in my life. I said, "Dad, 31 years you never missed a shift. Who covered your line when you were teaching me to drive stick in the school lot on Sundays?" He blinked. He said, "Nobody. Sundays the line was dark." I said, "Then they never gave you a thing you did not earn twice, and I am not burning a year. I am spending it. There is a difference, and you taught it to me." He looked at me a long time. My father has known me longer than anyone alive, and somewhere in that look, I believe he stopped seeing the boy who left in 1999 and started seeing whatever it was that had come back. He did not say yes. He just took the cream paper letter off the table, folded it in half the way I had folded their waiver, and dropped it in the drawer where he keeps things he has decided to outlive. Then he said, "You'll want the coffee on early tomorrow, I expect," and went to bed. That was my father's version of arming a weapon. I sat alone in the kitchen and looked at the pad, and the operation stopped being mine and became ours. And if the Deverils had known anything at all about quiet men, that is the night they would have started to run. The tilt came at the gate, in public, in daylight, and they did it to themselves, which has a justice to it that I have come to appreciate. 6 weeks after the injury, with rumors moving and the pension letter unanswered, and their write-up file on dust and growing, the company decided to get ahead of the story. Bryce Deveril called what the flyer named a community information meeting at the plant gate on a Saturday morning. Coffee urns, a little stage of pallets. The local radio invited. It was, in structure, a show of force dressed as a picnic, which is a form I knew professionally. Warlords hold them too. The message of such a meeting is never in the words. The message is, look how many chairs I can fill, and imagine what else I can do. 400 people came, because in Markland Falls, when the plant says come, you come. Bryce performed. I will grant him this. He was good at the club bar, and he was good on the pallets. Dark jeans, work jacket that had never seen work. The vocabulary of family and community, and outside agitators deployed in the cadence of a man who had practiced in a mirror. Certain individuals, he said, some of them barely connected to this town anymore, were spreading stories that put every job at that plant at risk. Deveril Stamping had kept the lights on in Markland Falls for 2 generations. The family, he said, hand on his chest, took the safety of its people more seriously than anything in this world. I stood at the back, at the edge of the crowd, drinking coffee from the urn, because it was a public meeting and I am a member of the public. And I said absolutely nothing. I did not have to. He could not leave me alone. That is the pathology of inherited power. It cannot bear a quiet man at the back of its meeting. He came down off the pallets, worked the aisle shaking hands, and arrived in front of me with the radio man's recorder 10 feet away and half the town turning to watch. Up close, he had his father's jaw and none of his father's stillness. He smiled a smile I have seen on minor warlords and one hotel concierge, and he said loudly enough for the recorder, Grant Halloran, you come home for the free coffee? I said the coffee was decent, and it was nice to see the men on a Saturday getting time and a half, which since the meeting was mandatory and unpaid, was not what they were getting, and every worker in earshot knew it, and a sound went through them, low, half a laugh, the sound a lever makes moving weight. His face changed. He stepped in close, and he dropped his voice to the register that had ended every argument he had ever been in, because every argument he had ever been in was with someone who owed his family money. And he put his hand flat on my chest to walk me backward, and he said, This is my gate, friend. Walk away while walking's free. Here is what happened next, and I want to be precise, because everything that came after in that county turned on these 4 seconds. Nothing happened. I did not move, not from stubbornness. It is a thing done to you by 25 years of doors and hillsides and rooms where the man in front of you might be wearing a vest. A stillness that is not held but simply is, the body of a man whose next move has already been decided and filed and is in no hurry. I looked at Bryce Deveril over his hand on my chest, and I let him see all the way in, just once, just for him. His hand came off my jacket like the fabric was a stove. He stepped back half a pace before he knew he was doing it, and his mouth opened and closed on the next line of the script, which had evaporated, and 400 people watched Bryce Deveril at his own gate, at his own meeting, with his own radio man recording, retreat from a quiet man who had not moved a muscle or said a word above room temperature. Into that silence, old Hollis Greer, 70 years old, VFW post commander, standing 3 feet to my left with a coffee, said, not loudly, but in the kind of voice that carries because it has nothing to prove, that's not a clipboard soldier. He knew. Of course he knew. Post commanders always know. They read men the way farmers read sky. By Sunday night, half the county was telling the other half what had stood at the gate, and the story got the details wrong in every version. And the one thing every version kept was the only thing that mattered. He put his hand on the Halloran boy, and then he took it back. The Deverils did what frightened institutions always do. They went looking for a file, a friendly clerk, a favor called in, a copy of a DD-214 pulled that should never have been pulled, And I know this happened because the clerk, to her credit, lost sleep and eventually said so, sworn. And I would have paid money to be in the room when they read it. 25 years, special forces, the schools, the groups, the dates lining up with things in the news they half remembered. And where they had been promised clipboard soldier and supply corps over and over, the same word. Commander, commander, commander. Lowell Deverell reportedly asked his attorney that night what exactly a task force was. I am told the attorney poured himself a drink before answering. Whatever he said, it was not calming, because within a week the family had hired outside counsel from Columbus, a crisis firm, the kind you retain when you have stopped asking whether and started asking how bad. They had finally understood there was an operation running against them. They still had not understood the operation was already over. The folder had gone out to the Occupational Safety and Health Administration and the Department of Labor's Office of Inspector General 9 days before the meeting at the gate. While Bryce was rehearsing on his pallets, a career OSHA area director named Yolanda Price, 49 years old, 21 years in the agency, the kind of public servant nobody makes movies about and everybody's life depends on, was reading Tino's chain of custody memo for the second time and signing an inspection order. I made my decision the way I always made decisions. Slowly, in writing, and once, it had been made for weeks. All the gate did, all Bryce's hand on my chest did, was let the town watch the ground tilt in real time. Sunday night, my father asked me what happens now. It was the first question he had asked about the operation itself, ever. I told him, now they find out the machine kept a diary. They came on a Tuesday at shift change, which was Price's choice and a professional's choice, maximum witnesses, minimum warning, everything in daylight. I was not there. I want that on the record because it is the point. I was drinking coffee in my father's kitchen with the radio off. The son of the injured man was nowhere near the building. What walked through the Deverell gate that morning was not revenge. It was the United States government, unannounced, with the right words on the right forms, and it did not need me to hold its coat. 3 OSHA compliance officers and 2 agents from the Department of Labor's Office of Inspector General presented at the front office at 6:55 in the morning. By 7:10, under the inspection warrant, they had control of press number 6's controller cabinet, and a technician was imaging the brake monitor's memory with Bryce Deverell watching from a distance that his new Columbus lawyer had instructed him to keep. By 8, they had the maintenance work orders, the badge system's gate logs pulled directly from the payroll vendor under subpoena, and Gil Prentice's inspection binder, the one with 2 years of signatures certifying a machine that its own manufacturer's data would presently reveal had logged over 11,000 cycles under active fault conditions, 140 of them in the 72 hours before my father cleared his last misfeed. Dustin told me what the floor was like that morning, and I have heard men describe liberations with less feeling. The lines were stopped, which never happened, and the building went so quiet you could hear the compliance officers' cartwheels on the concrete, and 400 people stood at their stations and watched the government open cabinets their own management had kept locked for years. Denny Falk was the one made to bring the keys. Dustin said the foreman walked the length of the floor with the key ring, past the men, not looking at anybody, and unlocked the controller cabinet on press number 6, and then stood back from it the way you stand back from a casket. Nobody jeered. Nobody said a word. He said the silence was not fear. It was 400 people watching the river discover it had a landlord. Machines do not golf with the sheriff. The controller's memory came out clean, time-stamped, and unforgiving. Every bypass, every fault acknowledged and overridden. Every ghost weekend matched to gate logs showing 40, 50 men badged in on Saturdays. The official schedule showed dark, paid in ways the wage and hour people would spend a happy autumn untangling. Prentice's signatures dissolved on contact. There is no argument a safety officer can make when his binder says the brake monitor passed on, dates the brake monitor itself recorded as faulted. He was suspended by noon and talking to the federal agents by Friday because Gil Prentice had a pension too, and unlike the Deverells, he could read a fault log and knew exactly what it meant. Dr. Paul Ledbetter's coding lasted a week longer. The emergency room intake and the surgical records went up against his first aid report, and the State Medical Board and the fraud unit of the Workers' Compensation Bureau both opened files, and the clinic's referral ledger, once subpoenaed, showed what everyone had always known and no one had ever written down. The practice was a subsidiary of the company in everything but paint. When the coating fell, it took the whole logging history with it. 7 years of injuries kept off the federal books. Each one a man with a name, several of whom began that month to call the same tired attorney in the county seat, whose water was suddenly running downhill. The 1998 waiver, the piece of paper this whole thing was named for, ended its life as a federal exhibit. You cannot waive workers' compensation in Ohio. You could not in 1998, which meant the document had never been a legal instrument at all. It was, the filings put it more dryly than I will, evidence of a decades-long practice of deterring injured employees from asserting statutory rights by means of a facially invalid release. 28 years of frightened signatures, and every one of them now testified for us. And then the money wall failed, faster than the legal one, exactly as designed. The insurance carrier, presented with proof that its own loss control engineer's red tags had been cut off a press twice, and that the insured had then run that press on concealed shifts until it took a man's hand, did what carriers do. It rescinded and reserved, which in plain language means no coverage for any of it, and see you in court. The Deverells woke up one morning owning every dollar of their own catastrophe. 2 days later, Halbert Appliances Supplier Compliance Office, having received the same public inspection data as everyone else, suspended the contract pending audit. 48 hours, one email, and the order book that Press 6 had been murdered to protect was gone. I had circled that outcome on the legal pad the first week. The Deverells thought Halbert was their reason. It was their artery. Payroll was missed on the second Friday of June. Lowell Deverell's crisis lawyers walked the company into federal receivership by the end of the month, which had one effect the family never intended, and I had counted on from the beginning. It took every asset, every account, and every decision in that plant out of Deverell hands and out of the county, into a federal courtroom where a Ledbetter had never had lunch with anyone. I went to see Lowell Deverell once, during, not after. I want to be honest with you about that meeting because it is the closest this story comes to the movie you may have been expecting, and it will disappoint you. And its disappointment is my entire point. I made an appointment. His assistant put me in the book, I suspect, out of pure curiosity. I walked into an office with a wall of photographs, governors and golf, and the plant in 1961, and Lowell Deverell, 66 years old, sat behind a desk the size of a flatbed and looked at me with the particular exhaustion of a man whose name is coming off things. I put the folded waiver on his desk, the original fold. I had kept it. I said, "You had 31 years of my father's hands. You should have asked what he raised with them." He looked at the paper for a while. Then he said, "And I will give him this much." He said it quietly and without theater. "We never asked because it never mattered before." I said, "I know," and I left. And that was the entire confrontation, and I have thought about his sentence many times since, because it was the truest thing any of them ever said. It had never mattered before. That is what a wall believes right up until the brick is gone. No one begged. I know the thumbnail on this video may have promised you begging, and I understand why, and the honest truth is better and colder. By July, the Deverells were not begging anyone for mercy. They were asking their lawyers, billably, what mercy was still procedurally available. The answer was, not much and none of it from me. It was never mine to give. That is what they could not grasp from the first folder to the last filing. I had not built a revenge. I had built a record. You cannot beg a record. The lattice came apart the way I had mapped it on the first night, in order of dependency. Each node discovering it had no reason to protect the others once the center stopped paying. The willful violation citations landed first. Willful being the word OSHA reserves for when you knew and ran it anyway. And two-cut zip ties on video is what knowing looks like in federal English. 6 figures per instance, instances stacked like cordwood. The criminal referrals went out the same season. Bryce Deverell and Gil Prentice on false statements and the falsified inspection records. Dr. Paul Ledbetter to the medical board and the comp fraud unit. Prentice cooperated. Bryce's Columbus lawyers are earning their retainer as I tell you this, and I wish them a long and educational engagement. Chuck Vogel was dismissed by the county commissioners in a public meeting that lasted 11 minutes, 10 of which were procedural. His signatures on a condemned machine turned out to have no friends at all once the cameras arrived. Judge Warren Ledbetter did not survive the season either, not because anyone proved a ruling was bought, but because the state's Judicial Conduct Board opened a review of 19 years of cases involving the county's largest employer, while his brother billed as its clinic, and there is a kind of review a man of 64 does not sit through. He announced his retirement citing health, and for once, nobody in the diner disputed the diagnosis. Sheriff Buck Amberson answered questions from state investigators about the running of my plates and the visits paid to witnesses. What comes of it, I do not know yet. I know he does not wave with 2 fingers anymore. He came to the diner once in late June while I was at the counter, and he put out his hand, and I looked at it exactly 1 second longer than a handshake can survive, and then I shook it, because my father was watching, and my father raised me square. But the second was mine, and Amberson felt it, and the county felt him feel it. And here's the part I am proudest of, the part that was in the folder's design from the first page. The plant did not die. The receiver kept the lines running through the whole proceeding, because the receiver's job is the estate's value, and the estate's value was 400 trained people and standing contracts. In September, a machine tool group out of Indiana bought Deverell Stamping and Tool with the workforce intact, at a price the creditors grumbled about, on terms the workers did not. The pension trust made whole and separated from ownership, the safety systems rebuilt to the letter, and a worker safety committee written into the purchase, with a seat on it filled, by election of the floor, by a 26-year-old press operator named Dustin Paiva, whose write-up file had been formally expunged with the receiver's apology, and whose testimony about January and March had been, in the words of the OIG agent, the door the whole house came through. The county paper ran the story of the sale on the front page, written by a young woman the Deverells had no number for, and the headline was about the town, not the family, which was itself the news. People ask me, the ones who know the whole shape of it, whether I ever felt the pull to do it the other way. I will answer that here, once, plainly. Yes, twice. The night my father read the pension letter at the kitchen table, and the morning I watched him fail to button his own cuff with the brace on and pretend he had meant to leave it. Both times the old inventory opened itself in my head, unbidden, the way a door you have walked through 10,000 times opens at a touch. Names, numbers, capabilities, a lifetime of knowing exactly how walls come down the fast way. And both times I closed it, and I will tell you what closed it. It was not fear of consequence, and I will not insult you by claiming it was saintliness. It was that the fast way would have made it about me, and this was never mine. It was his. 31 years of doing it right was my father's case, and the only reckoning worthy of the man was one built the way he built things, square, documented, on time, and made to hold weight long after the builder goes home. Nobody went to a graveyard. Everybody went on the record. It turns out that was the thing they could not survive. And on a Tuesday in July, 2 men on a scissor lift unbolted the letters over the gate, and my father sat in his truck with his brace on the wheel and gave them the nod, and we are back where I began, which is the only place I was ever trying to get. I will not pretend the hand came back. That is not this kind of story, because this is a true kind of story. 3 surgeries and a fixator, and then the brace, and twice a week my father drives himself to occupational therapy in the county seat, where a therapist half his age makes him pick up wooden pegs and he pretends to complain about it. The grip is partial. It is enough to hold a coffee cup, a steering wheel, a grandson someday, God willing. The compensation, the real compensation, the kind the law had owed him from the first morning, was made whole through the receivership with the penalties the statute stacks on employers who play the games they played. The surgery bills are paid. The pension that letter threatened is not only safe, it is out of the family's reach forever, sitting in a trust with a federal judge's fingerprints on the lid. He went back to the plant in October, not to the press line. The new operators sit through a training program now, and the safety module ends with 40 minutes that are not on any slide. Amos Halloran, 68, at the front of the room with his brace, teaching misfeeds, teaching lockout, teaching the line the way he taught it to Dustin Paiva years ago, and no one in that room reads his quiet as small. The town looks at him differently now, and I want to name what changed because it took me a while to see it. It is not that they learned what his son used to command. That story ran the county twice over, and it is why Bryce Deverell's hand came off my chest, and I will not pretend it did no work. But that is not what changed the diner. What changed the diner is that the whole county watched a quiet man be right for 31 years and finally saw it. They watched him refuse to sign at the moment when signing was the only sane thing left, with his pension on the table and his hand in a machine's handwriting. The recognition my father gets on the square now, the coffee that arrives before he orders it, the way men on the sales safety committee say his name in meetings he does not attend, none of that is fear of me. It is the town paying down a 31-year debt of attention, and I consider it the only judgment in this entire affair that matters. Denny Falk came to the house in November. He stood on the porch turning his cap in his hands, 22 years of company arithmetic all over his face, and he asked to speak to my father, not to me, which was correct, and I respected it. I do not know everything that was said because I took my coffee to the kitchen, but I know my father came in afterward and put the kettle back on, and all he said was, "Denny's boy made the dean's list at the college." That is a complete transcript of my father forgiving a man. The two of them watch the high school games together now from the same spot by the fence they stood at 30 years ago. And if you did not know the whole story, you would think nothing in that town had ever happened. Dustin Paiva brings his girlfriend by for supper the first Sunday of every month. House rule, my father's rule. No plant talk until the plates are cleared. The boy sits on the safety committee now and studies nights for his machinery certification. And when he gets stuck on the math, he calls me, and I make him find the answer himself. And he calls me sir no matter how many times I tell him my name. And my father finds this funnier than I think is strictly necessary. One evening on the porch late in the summer, he asked me, plainly the way he asks about carburetors, "What was it you commanded then, actually?" I told him the unclassified version, the detachment and the company and the task force, the numbers of people, the places I could name. He listened all the way through with his eyes on the yard, and he was quiet so long I thought the conversation was over, which with my father it often is. Then he said, "Your mother knew you'd be something. She just thought it'd be louder." I said the Army had thought so too at first. He laughed, one short breath through the nose, which for Amos Halloran is a standing ovation, and we sat there while the light went, and the presses thumped away across town like a heart under new management, and my truck stayed in Markland Falls another month after that, for no reason either of us ever named. I have had a year now to think about what I actually brought home from 25 years, because it was not the thing the town gossiped about, and it was not the thing that made a rich man's son take his hand off my jacket. It was patience, and I learned it before the Army ever met me. I learned it from a man who worked one press for 31 years, who packed lunches at 5 in the morning with oil in the creases of his knuckles, who taught me that the strongest thing you can do to a wall that wants a reaction is to give it a record instead. The Deverell's whole religion was a piece of paper, the belief that paper beats people. They were half right. Paper does beat people. It just has no loyalty, and one morning all their paper got up and testified for us. So here is my question for you, and I want the honest answer, not the easy one. They never faced me in a courtroom, and I never raised my hand, and every consequence that found that family was carried in by the law they thought they owned. If it had been your father's hand, would the quiet way have been enough for you? Or would some part of you have needed them to feel it personally, the old way? Be honest with me. I read every single one. If this story meant something to you, hit that like button and subscribe, because it costs you nothing and it tells me you want more stories like this one. And before you go, what should I write for you next? More military justice, emotional family drama, or something darker? Tell me in the comments and I will write it for you. Until then, stay safe, watch your perimeter, and never forget who has your back.